A warm welcome to all the viewers. Friends, in this video, I am going to explain how you can start with effective research. How you can start with a effective research. Say whether you are doing research for the purpose of framing an article or framing a dissertation or writing your PhD thesis. It is important to move in the right direction so that later you do not feel any problems, any complications in your research. So, how can you start? How can you start? So, the first point which is important over here is that you must have proper knowledge of the domain in which you want to do research. While fixing up a topic for research, getting it approved from the committee of your institution, if it's a purpose of master's dissertation or your PhD synopsis, the proposal, you should keep few things in mind, which is first is background information about that topic, background of that topic. How much do you know about it? What is the current state of knowledge base on that topic? How can you contribute or advance that knowledge base? Advance that knowledge base. Second is viability. Whether you will be able to do it in the prescribed time. Often it's seen that people take 5 years, 6 years, or more than 6 years to complete their PhDs. So, the objectives which you lay down for your PhD should be smart. They should be achievable in realistic terms, practically in the prescribed time. That is quite important for completing your PhD or dissertation. Viability means how you will do it, how, where, when you will collect the data in case it's a primary data collection through a questionnaire, where you will collect the data, how you will collect the data. It's very, very important. Next is how you will analyze that data. How to analyze that data. So, when I talk about analyzing the data, how you will analyze the data, right? It's quite important to know that if you are unfamiliar with the types of data, which is basically divided into two categories, that is continuous data or categorical data. So, what type of data are you collecting for your study? Based upon the nature of the data and based upon the laid down objectives of your study, you must have an idea, a brief idea, which you can discuss with your supervisor, your colleagues, and other learned people in your domain. You will come to know that based upon your objectives, how you will analyze the data, taking into due consideration the type of data which you have collected through your survey questionnaire. Because later on, if you want to fulfill your objectives, then it's important that you use the right technique, right statistical tests for the analysis. So this statistical tests is quite very important in research. When to apply parametric test and when to apply non-parametric test, you should be well aware about the concepts. Next is, how do you come to know about the gaps? Told in my previous video also, the easiest way to know the gaps is to extensive review of literature. Extensive review of literature. This will help you to find out the gaps and certain variables which have been used by previous research, certain independent variables which are used to predict the dependent variable by previous researchers, right? You need to find out that. So, say for an instance, previous researchers have found the effect of parents' genetic upon height of the children height, right? So they have used genetics, they have used exercise, that is physical exercise done by the children, but they have not used health drink effect, right? How does a health drink, there are several health drinks available in the market, affects the height of the children? So in this case, if your study is talking about the effect of health drink upon children's height, say one of your objectives is framed in such a way, In that case, you can take this genetics and exercise as control variables in your study. So we can take genetics and exercise as control variables in our study. How to take control variables I have explained in my previous video. You might like to go back and check on what are control variables. Once you use these control variables in your study, you can assess the true effect of a new variable which is being used by you to check the influence upon children's height. So the new variable being put by you is health drink. If you don't control the variables, then there's a scope of lot of prediction error coming onto the dependent variable. So we call it prediction error. Lot of prediction error depicted by small d upon dependent variable. To reduce the prediction error, we have to control the variables which have been previously used by the researchers and frame our questionnaire in such a manner that includes the control variables, so that later on we can have the data to put them in our model as control variables. Now, this is one of the easiest way to find a gap, because through extensive review of literature you determine the variables which have been used already by researchers, and you are working on a new variable, that is health drink. So once you are working with a new variable, that becomes a gap in itself, and which will offer new insights, meaningful insights, as you have controlled for the earlier used variables. Another way of finding the gaps in your study is talking to your guides, talking to your supervisors, or talking to experts in the domain. They might be having certain things which have not been explored yet, or a new phenomena which can be explored by you. Now, once you have ascertained the gaps, it's important to frame the objectives which align with the gaps, which help you to address the gaps in your study. The addressal of your gaps through your objectives is actually the contribution of your study. Contribution of your study. How you address the gaps through the laid down objectives of your study, that is the contribution of your study. Another way of finding a gap is methodological gap. Methodological gap means that someone who has previously done a similar research has used a particular statistical technique to explore. Say that person has first conducted EFA, exploratory factor analysis, and then done regression analysis using SPSS. Now, if you know what are the limitations of doing regression in SPSS and how these limitations could be better addressed using another statistical technique or method of analysis, then you can put it as a methodological gap which is addressed by your study. Say, rather than checking in individual regression analysis for a complex model having a number of independent variables and a number of DVs, what you can do, you can go for structural equation modeling, wherein you have certain assumptions, but this methodology is fit to handle a number of independent variables and a number of dependent variables, that DVs, rather than using them alone in regression analysis. Also, in behavioral sciences, we have concepts like fuzzy set qualitative comparative analysis, FSQCA, we have necessary condition analysis, NCA, we have important performance map analysis, importance performance map analysis. You can of course use these techniques as well. Apart from this, these days we have in Smart PLS 4, which is quite a user friendly software, we have GSCA, generalized structural component analysis, we have partial least square structural equation modeling, we have PLS consistent SEM. In case you just have reflective constructs, you can use consistent SEM. In case you have formative and reflective, you PLS SEM. In case you want the results which are somewhere in between the results which are given to you by IBM SPSS AMOS, which is CB SEM, covariance based structural equation modeling, and PLS SEM, which are somewhere in between this, then you can do GSCA analysis, that is generalized structured component analysis. Now this is how you can do all this stuff. There are different softwares available which I've discussed in various videos on my channel. You can search for the videos and look into those to get the information on different softwares which are used. There are some free softwares and some licensed softwares as well. Now, what else you can do? Gap identification is quite important. Sometimes you address a contextual gap. So say a particular study was done in context to adults behavior, and now you want to check the behavior of Gen Z, especially Gen Z individuals, not all the adults. So by adults I mean everyone who is above 18 years of age, above 18 years, and Gen Z is a particular segment of people which is influencing the current market, influencing the current trends in technology, in consumer behavior. You see a lot of influence of Gen Z. So I want to do a study on Gen Z, and the previous study was done with the adults in a European country, and now I want to replicate the study in my nation's context. Say I belong to Asian country, so I'll do this analysis in Asian country. Now I should be particularly clear about that I may get different results over here, which are different from European country results, European results. But that is the beauty of social sciences research. You might get different kind of path coefficients and their significance between independent and dependent variables. You might get similar results as well. So that will help you to get an insight upon the current situation of the problem in a particular context. Right? So these are the few ways. Now, again and again, I mention in my workshops, in my faculty development programs as well, that the most important thing is review of literature. The more you review the literature, the better clarity you get about your own research. Clarity of thoughts, clarity on methodology, which methodology has to be used, clarity on the gaps, and clarity on analysis. Right? In turn, you get to know what you want to do, how your study will be different and contributing to the existing knowledge base. Apart from this, review of literature expands your knowledge base, which is very, very important in research. Once your knowledge base is extended, then you can easily frame your research design and work towards the fulfillment of your laid down objectives. I hope the session was interesting and useful for you, and you will definitely share it with your friends and faculty colleagues. See you next time with some more informative content. Thanks a lot.